Hello, my friends and my fellow VEDSies. So one of Caleb's challenges for us this year was to teach the other VEDSies something that we would consider ourselves an expert in, which is great because I was already going to do it, because just before then, Graham had asked for a What the Heck is D&D video. I've been consistently playing D&D for about 18 months now. Before that, I did a little bit as a DM, and I had been watching live streamed games for a bit. So I think I'm reasonably qualified to give this explanation. I mean, it is one of my favorite things in the whole wide world. So Dungeons & Dragons, or D&D, which we spell as D&D or DND, the letters, is part of a genre of games known as tabletop role-playing games. All tabletop role-playing games have different genres, rules, and vibes, but to some extent they are a fusion of strategy board game and long-form improv session. And each game has a different balance of these. And part of what makes D&D so beloved is how easy it is to customize that balance to whatever your table wants. So at some tables you'll see people getting really invested into role play and acting and doing character voices and taking 15 minutes to have a conversation with somebody else's character's mom just because it makes sense for the story. And at another table, the character is just an avatar to kill things and get loot. Both are totally valid ways to play. Although personally, I tend to enjoy games that are about 70 to 80% story and 20 to 30% puzzles and combat. So how do you actually play? First, you need to figure out who the Dungeon Master, or DM, is going to be. They're responsible for the literal world building of the game. Where are we? What religions are here? What's the political system? Who's going to be the main villain? What rules are we going to bend or change to make this game more fun for our table? What does prison guard number 3 like to do in his free time, and what type of voice does he have? And how am I going to make a story that's interesting to everyone here? Those are all things the DM needs to figure out. There are lots of worlds you can play in D&D. There are so many source books with so many different types of adventures and different locations that you can play in, and so many of them are so wonderful and creative and fun. But if you like, you can also create your very own world, which is what we call homebrew. As a matter of fact, both of the long-term campaigns that I am a part of take place in homebrew settings, and I absolutely love them. Okay, so what if you're not the DM? What's the responsibility then? If you're not the DM, you're what we call a player, and it's a player's job to create their character that exists in this world. The group of characters that the players make, known as the party, are the protagonists of the story. And the DM creates opportunities that allows the party to become the heroes or villains of legend that the players would like to create. Now, when you're making a character, everyone's process is slightly different, but in the end, there are certain things that you're going to need to know before you get to your first session. Your character needs to have a race, a class, a background, a name, a backstory, some stats, and some personality traits. Let's break that down a bit. Race in D&D is basically a synonym for species. There are all of the fantasy races that you tend to think of: elves, dwarves, goblins, orcs, all that good stuff. But there's also a lot of fun, unique D&D races. Each one comes with its own abilities and bonuses, and depending on the kind of game you're playing, it can make a big difference in how your character is treated. A character's class is essentially just their job. Like, in theory, they're going to be an adventurer, but what kind of adventurer? A stealthy thief and a holy warrior have very different skill sets and abilities. And because of that wide range in abilities, there are lots of different classes to choose from. Some do magic, some don't, some do a little, some are religious, some aren't. There's a lot of options here. And each class has the opportunity to get more specialized with subclasses, which allow you even more specific abilities. Next, you need to figure out, who is this? I mean, elf wizard isn't a person, it's a set of descriptors. Did they go to school? How old are they? Why do they want to be an adventurer? You don't need a 5-page backstory and a playlist and a really deep understanding of their inner psyche. I mean, it can be fun, but you don't need to. But you have to know at least a little bit about them, especially because then you can choose a background for them. Rules as Written offers this feature called Backgrounds, which lets you customize your character even more than you already could. Each one comes with its own suggested personality traits, suggested characteristics, and equipment and abilities that you get just because your character was this thing before they became an adventurer. They can come in pretty handy sometimes. Plus, it's cool when your character's backstory actually reflects in their abilities. Speaking of abilities, let's talk stats. Every character has 6 main stats: Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. You generate stats to determine how good you are at each of these things, with 1 being comedically abysmal and 20 being a savant. Each class relies on 1 or 2 abilities more than the others, and so it's important that you make your character good at those things. What exactly do these 6 words mean? Strength is, well, how physically strong you are. How much do you lift? Are you good at rock climbing? How many push-ups can you do before you start getting tired? That's all strength. Dexterity, on the other hand, is about your reflexes. How fast are you? Can you do parkour? Can you dodge out of the way if I throw something at you? That sort of thing. Constitution is the last of the physical stats and probably the most important for all characters across the board because it measures how good you are at not dying. Can you resist poison? Can you fight to keep alive while you're bleeding out on the battlefield? How long can you hold your breath? These are the things that Constitution determines. Do not dump Constitution or you will be the most easily killable character in the party. Then transitioning into the mental stats, we start with Intelligence, which is book smarts. How much do you know and how easily do you retain it? Wisdom is more street smarts, kind of. It's how in tune you are with people and your surroundings. So like, wisdom is what makes you notice a colorful mushroom off the beaten path. Intelligence is what tells you it's a hallucinogenic, and wisdom is what tells you that the party rogue is lying when they say they haven't eaten 5 of them already. And last but not least is charisma, which is just force of personality. People tend to get weird ideas about what a charismatic character has to be, but there's no real rule. It's just stage presence after all. In addition to the 6 main stats, there are also abilities. Each of the abilities is tied to one of those main stats, but you can also be proficient in it, which adds a bonus. Your race, class, and background to determine how many and which specific proficiencies you can choose, so you want to keep an eye out on that when you're making your character. Okay, so you've created a character. Now what? So the general way things will go is that the DM will set a scene. For this example, we'll say that everyone who's going to be in the party is auditioning to become members of a circus. Once the scene is set, the DM will ask the players what they would like to try, and any player who's got an idea can pipe up with what they would like their character to attempt to do. So if my character is at the circus to audition to be the strong man, maybe I want to do some push-ups, or start flirting with someone, or take a swig from my flask to ease my nerves. If it's easy enough to do, the DM will probably agree that that's what happens and maybe embellish on the scene a little bit. But if it actually requires some skill, you'll have to roll for it. They'll tell you what skill it requires, or maybe give you options if you can argue it, and you'll pick up your d20, your 20-sided die, and roll. The number the dice hits, plus any bonuses you have to that roll, is what you rolled. Again, 1 is abysmal and 20 is awesome in this situation. So if I rolled like a 7, but I had a +5 bonus, I'd get a 12, and I could get a decent number of push-ups in and not totally embarrass myself. And then another player might make a comment in character, which might strike up a conversation, which might lead to a arm wrestling contest, which she rolls better than I do, and so my character offers to take her out for drinks. And then the druid notices that the circus tent is on fire, and we send the rogue to investigate, and so on and so forth until the story comes to a natural conclusion. So yeah, that's basically what D&D is. Now, I know I didn't do justice to it mechanically or emotionally, There are so many rules, and it would take forever and a day to go over all of them in detail. And there's no way to describe the epic highs and lows of a really great campaign without experiencing them. But this was just for Graham and Alicia, and really anyone who's curious, to get an idea of what the heck D&D is. Now, if you want to learn more, I'll be linking the Handbook or Helper series Critical Role made a couple of years ago. The videos are short but specific, and a really great way to start off with a new race, class, or any of the rules, really. But I know there are a million different resources for D&D, so people who have experience who are watching, maybe suggest some of your favorites in the comments. And if you've gotten this far and you've never played and you're thinking, this sounds fun, it is! Please check it out! There's a reason we love this game so much. And with that, my friends and fellow VEDSies, I will see you tomorrow.